Today, we're going to journey back to a moment that changed the course of history, the conquest of Makkah. But, this isn't really a story about military tactics or strategy. It's a story about the conquest of the human heart, led by a man whose entire being was defined by mercy. So let's start with a really big question. What does victory actually mean? Is it just about taking over land and defeating your opponents? Or is it something deeper? For the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, returning to the city that had exiled him, well, that wasn't a test of his power. It was a test of his character. And at the heart of this entire event is this one single guiding principle. The Prophet's title, A Mercy to the Worlds. Now, this wasn't just some nice label. This was his mission. It was the very lens through which he saw the world. So let's see how this incredible mercy played out when he came face to face with the very people who had been his worst enemies. Our first story is about Ikrimah. Now, if that name sounds familiar, it's because his father was Abu Jahl, one of the most hostile, relentless opponents of Islam. Ikrimah's story is just a powerful example of what true forgiveness looks like. Okay, so try to picture this. Makkah has fallen. Ikrimah, who spent years fighting bitterly against the Prophet, is now on the run. He is absolutely convinced he's a dead man, and for good reason, given his history. But his wife, Haanee, she does something incredibly brave. She goes and gets a guarantee of safety for him, and then convinces him to come back and face the very man he'd spent his life trying to destroy. Can you imagine that journey back? Now, when Ikrimah stands before the Prophet, listen to what he says. It is just so profound. He doesn't just ask for a pardon. He asks for forgiveness for every single act of enmity, every journey he took, every fight he fought, all with the stated goal of, in his words, extinguishing your light. This isn't just an apology. This is a complete soul-bearing recognition of everything he'd done. And the response he gets? Not a hint of revenge, not a single I told you so, just complete, total, unconditional forgiveness. And that single act of mercy didn't just save Ikrimah's life, it completely transformed it. Right then and there, he promised to spend double the money and double the effort for the cause of God that he had once spent fighting against it. He wanted to rebuild with the same fire he once used to destroy. And you know what? He kept that promise, becoming one of the most passionate defenders of the faith. All right, let's turn to another story. This one is different, it's much more personal, and it shows another side of this conquest of hearts. This is the story of Fudaalah ibn Umayr, a man who didn't show up to surrender. He showed up to kill. The scene is the most sacred spot in the world, right around the Kaaba. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is peacefully circling it, lost in devotion. And moving through that same crowd is Fudaalah, a dagger hidden on his person, his heart just filled with this murderous plan. He's getting closer and closer, just waiting for the right moment. And this is the moment everything changes. Just as Fudaalah is ready to act, the Prophet turns to him. And with this incredible insight that could only have come from God, he asks this unbelievably simple question. Fudaalah is just floored. He tries to lie, oh, nothing, just remembering God. But it's no use. His darkest secret was just brought into the light, not with an accusation, but with a gentle, knowing question. What happens next is just miraculous. The Prophet doesn't call for the guards, he doesn't raise his voice, he just smiles, asks God to forgive Fudaalah, and then places his hand on the chest of the man who was just about to murder him. Fudaalah himself would later say that in that single instant, every ounce of hatred he had just evaporated and was replaced by this overwhelming love. A simple touch and a quiet prayer conquered a heart that a sword never could have. You see, these stories, they're not just isolated incidents of kindness. They are actually the building blocks, the foundational principles of the new society being born in that moment. A society balanced on the twin pillars of absolute divine justice and deep personal humility. This was the blueprint. And here's where we see that perfect balance. On one hand, you have unwavering justice. When a woman from a very powerful tribe was caught stealing, people tried to use her status to get her off the hook. The Prophet's response was swift and absolute. He said, "By Allah, if my own daughter Fatima were to steal, I would cut off her hand." No one was above the law of God. But then, on the other hand, you have this incredible personal mercy. When his cousin, Haanee, gave her personal word of protection to two men, the Prophet honored it without hesitation. He made it clear, we grant protection to whoever you protect. So the message being sent here was huge, and it was foundational.
In this new community, your family name and your status couldn't save you from the law, but the personal pledge of safety from any individual was to be held sacred by the entire community. It was justice and mercy working hand in hand. And this humility, it wasn't just for big public moments. It was in every little thing. When his dearest friend, Abu Bakr, brought his very elderly father to meet the Prophet, look at his reaction. Instead of just accepting this gesture of respect, he gently says, "Shouldn't you have let the old man stay at his home so I could have gone to him?" Just think about that. At the absolute peak of his authority and victory, his first thought is one of service and respect for an elder. So let's tie all of this together now, because what we're seeing is that the real legacy of this conquest wasn't about capturing a city. It was something so much bigger and more permanent. So the takeaway is crystal clear. The real victory here, the one that has endured for centuries, wasn't about land. It was about winning hearts. And how were they won? Through magnanimous forgiveness for a sworn enemy like Ikrimah, through unwavering justice that held everyone to the same standard, through a deep humility that honored the elderly, and through an absolute transformative mercy that could turn an assassin's heart to love with just a prayer. At the end of the day, that's what the conquest of Makkah was truly about. It wasn't the end of a war, it was the beginning of a civilization. A new society that wasn't built on force or fear, but on a revolutionary code of compassion that was designed to inspire people for all time. And that brings us right back to our first question, and it's one I'll leave you with. In a world that is still so often driven by power and getting even, these events from 1400 years ago force us to ask ourselves, what is real strength? And how does mercy, so much more than might, define a legacy that can truly last forever?